The Pacers now in an 0-2 hole fall 130-121 to a somewhat depleted Knicks team who already has Mitchell Robinson out, already has Bojan Bogdanovic out, already has Julius Randle out. Jalen Brunson misses time with a foot injury during the game. OG Anunoby gets hurt and doesn't finish the game. And the Pacers give up 130 points. I think the two key stretches of this game, at least by my eye, the start of the third quarter, the starters get outscored, give up a 20-2 run over about a 6.5 minute span. And then obviously in closing time again, when a team that's playing their starters more minutes outscores the Pacers 25-18. So I think we can start there. And I think the big question that was on everybody's minds that I got asked a bunch of times last night, do you think, Samson, that TJ and Obi Toppin should have been in the closing lineup at the end of that game?
So there's some politics here. I think to make that work, one of the easy things is like, who are you taking out? Nembhard, Nesmith, Pascal, Miles. And I think, even though, and we'll get into it a little bit, Pascal, bad game. Offensively, really struggled. And you can see that the struggles at the free throw line are affecting some of his aggressiveness on the drive. There's a reason some of these drives are stopping a little shorter than they used to. It's a problem. I would have gone for, probably not Obi, probably would have gone for TJ instead of Aaron. I would have tried something like that. I went and poked around on cleaning the glass for like the TJ, Andrew, Hallie minutes, or Halliburton, minutes. And there's like 8 possessions of it in the playoffs. 4 of them with one lineup, 4 of them with another. The one lineup is like gangbusters, 4 possessions of insanity. Small sample size theater, of course. And during the regular season, it's a complete toss-up too. I think that would have been interesting to go towards. But I know that we're here a little bit to dispel a little bit of the like broadcast myth-making that went on regarding like TJ and Stan Van Gundy being kind of mystified by his defense, that he spoke of it as if he was the Brunson stopper when he wasn't. So I would have liked to see TJ, a 3-guard. I would have liked to see the 3-guard orientation of it. That's where I'm at, basically.
What
Could
do
be
you
wrong.
No. I mean, I was honest. I tweeted this morning, like, I don't know. Maybe if they played TJ, maybe you do get a different outcome. What do you think is gained by doing that?
What I think is gained by, it's kind of what we talked about a little bit beforehand. You're able to weaponize Tyrese a little bit more by playing him next to TJ. And TJ, I think, has shown a ridiculous amount of craft and ability to read odd spacing in these playoffs so far. To take, these hybrid defenses that are being shown in odd lineups and find pockets that manipulate the defense and change it. And I'm not so sure I'm not thinking like TJ instead of Nembhard. That isn't my thought process. My thought process is TJ instead of Aaron. And that's the cool thing about basketball, is there's a lot of different ways to try and map out a route to success. But I think having TJ there as a guy to stir up the defense, they would have been able to reap a few more rewards. And I also believe in Andrew shooting a little bit more than some people do, probably. As far as like playing off ball. And I really do believe in, whether it's Tyrese or Andrew, their ability to work off of an existing advantage that's being given. So that's probably my idea of it.
I would say, I mean, if you're going to play TJ in the starting lineup, which I think you're basically conceding here, and I think everyone would need to concede that if TJ is going to be out there closing, he's going to be running the offense. Tyrese is not going to be running the offense. Because in the first quarter, I told you these stats ahead of time. Like when the broadcast was kind of talking about, oh, Tyrese is being so much aggressive in the first quarter versus the third quarter. He had 3 drives in the first quarter and he had 4 drives in the fourth quarter. Like a lot of the shots that he was getting in the first quarter are based off of what you're saying. Like TJ's stirring the drink, TJ's attacking baseline. Maybe you're getting some skip pass threes to Tyrese. Maybe, Tyrese is shaping up around the actions in other ways. He had like an uncontested reverse layup drive. He had a couple shots at the rim off of an offensive rebound and a fortuitous bounce, and then a floater where I didn't think he looked like he had a lot of lift. So that's basically what you're conceding, because otherwise, like there was a possession very early on where they were trying to get Tyrese open. He ends up getting denied, kind of circles around, wheels around like what the Knicks are doing with Brunson into like a gut Chicago, gets it back. Tyrese dribbles off the pick, and TJ's defender is nexting. He's clear off of TJ. Then the Knicks are peeling that. They're doing the full next rotation. The Pacers are not doing that against Josh Hart, which I'm sure we can get to. later on what's going on with some of the one pass away, Josh Hart, Dante DiVincenzo rotations. But you're saying that you're going to close game 2 of a playoff game with TJ as the point guard, which I don't know. Maybe that ends with better results for you. But defensively is kind of where the broadcast was going. And I just want to throw these clips up there because basically, like, especially if people wanted it to be Obi and TJ, I know from the games that I've seen between these two teams that Brunson's going to go at Obi if Obi is out there at the end of the game and if that's the rest of the lineup. So here's a possession where mostly, like, if TJ was the primary on Jalen, TJ was not staying on Jalen. That was a switch. So he's giving up this switch to Obi in space. Obi does okay with his length to kind of stay in front. Jalen ultimately misses that shot at the rim.
Actually, I like that a lot from Obi. And that is kind of what Benji was talking about in the preview, is like, just really, you got to try and stay in front and get a contest there, which also goes back to, you know, who are the best Brunson defenders. They're usually like agile wings who can try and contain and have strength and length for contests.
And different philosophies, because when Nembhard's out there, if Obi or Tyrese gets targeted, they're not giving up that switch. Like, Nembhard is not switching off of Brunson when Obi and Tyrese get targeted in these games. So here OG goes, sets that screen. Nembhard stays in front, cuts him off. Stays and handles a few bumps. Then he passes off, gets back out. I'm just not seeing where the world of difference is here, especially because the way the two of them are being used on ball against Jalen Brunson is not the same way. Like, even late in the third quarter, and here's one of the ones where Tyrese wasn't aggressive enough, and it was bad for Aaron to get a wide open corner 3, I guess. Here's TJ picking Jalen Brunson up full court, and they switch it.
Yep.
Ben Shepherd contests the 3 from Jalen Brunson on a switch. That's not TJ contesting the 3. Here, because Tyrese is being put in the action, Nembhard stays on it. It's a contested 3. So, like, are we basing the defense on whether the shot goes in or not? Because this one did go in. The other one did not. And then here's TJ picking him up full court. There's no screen. I'm not really seeing a massive difference where this needed to be like the harping point that it was. And I will say this. I don't know why the Pacers are pressing this high up on Isaiah Hartenstein on all of these handoff actions. Like, you're not going to get a lot from Josh Hart or the other moving parts on the floor, especially in lineups where he's on there as well as Precious Achiuwa, to be giving this much respect to people potentially rising and firing off a DHO that's clear out there at the logo. And then TJ gets backdoor cut by Brunson to the rim. So, like, if the argument is for it to be a defensive change, I don't know that I'm seeing what that is, I guess I should say.
I'm on team offense. The defense, I think, similar to, you know, the aggressiveness comments about Tyrese. In the first quarter, Tyrese split twice. And, like, the screening action at the top, like, found the gap, went between it, got middle twice. One for the free throw, one for like the other floater he took.
Did you think he had lift when he got to that floater?
No, not really. It's different than what I've seen in the past. However, I do think that, like, a few moments create inflection points in how we view things. And there's a couple possessions where TJ on Brunson did a good job of containing near the sideline. And so Stan Van Gundy picks up on that. And then that becomes like a Stan Van Gundy talking point. And I think for viewers, myself included, when you see kind of like these rapid bursts into space from Tyrese to split screening actions at the top to get middle, that seems a lot more aggressive than kind of like turning the corner and getting to the same spot at a slower pace. Like, it's the exact same thing, and it creates similar results. It's just that these things stick in the mind. And, you know, that's the Pacers, because unfortunately they're dealing with Halliburton, who has a couple things that you can see will create difficulty for him to translate to the playoff style. He's also dealing with an injury, one that could be lingering in his hamstring and one that is existing in the back spasms. All that kind of stuff creates like this hot button topic for, okay, what's happening with Halliburton. And then you have Pascal, who has whatever the hell is going on with him at the free throw line, which is affecting his aggressiveness on drives, which is turning him into a short mid-range shot maker only. And he's also shooting, 25% from 3 in the playoffs, 43% from the free throw line. The big dogs are underperforming. And like, Tyrese has more excuses on that end than Pascal does. Pascal had the big start. It's just like, when these conversations are polemic. That's how it's always going to be. And you talking about like how TJ's presence creates more nexting opportunities, or it creates like an opportunity for a peel switch, is not something most people are going to talk about. And them's the breaks. Now, I don't mean to give like Tyrese and Pascal a pass. I don't mean to say that TJ McConnell is suddenly like the guard who shifts the landscape of the playoffs. I think more than anything, the Knicks are playing better basketball. And I think more than anything, the Knicks non-shooters are shooting the ball pretty damn well, and the Pacers non-shooters are not. That's really difficult to stomach. And like through these first two games, and especially last night, Pascal was a huge swing point. And like I've watched Pascal play a lot of good games. I've watched him play really good playoff games, finals games. I watched him close out, hit a game-winning shot in Game 6 of the finals, 26-10 in that game, and 5, I think. I've seen that happen. Last night was really bad, and a really good Pascal game maybe swings this one. A really good whoever game in Game 1 maybe swings something. Sometimes players have to play better, and it's kind of just been like this pinging thing of like, where does blame go? Where does blame go? How do we support these players with structure? I get it, but the Knicks are playing really well. Josh Hart is banging triples. They're also like in the second half of Game 1 and Game 2 combined, they're like getting like 50, what is their offensive rebound rate? 58%, something like that. Nuts, insanity. The Knicks are an incredible team in that they go harder, they win the margins, and then they keep winning them. And you think like there's supposed to be a point of diminishing return, and it doesn't happen. So I watch these games, and I think it's more so a credit to the Knicks than it is like, oh, Pacers bad. But I guess we'll see what happens going forward, I guess.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about what Pascal was in this game. I mean, to start it, he's guarding OG Anunoby and had several really tragic closeouts to OG Anunoby, bit on pump and goes before that even happened. But I do think that just for the sake of transparency, like, again, some of these screening combinations, it did not help the Knicks. I want to be clear. It did not help the Knicks that OG Anunoby got hurt, especially with how well he was playing. But it did alter what some of the matchups were late for the Pacers, where who Pascal's now being guarded from is what you said in the preview about how well during the regular season that Precious Achiuwa had guarded Pascal Siakam. There were a lot of minutes with Precious at the 4 guarding Pascal. And if you have Pascal screening for Tyrese, this isn't necessarily an advantage matchup. Plus, I want to point out that in the fourth quarter, when you're talking about potentially playing TJ or somebody else, Obi or whoever, in place of Nesmith, that Brunson was pretty much exclusively guarding Nesmith during those minutes, and they weren't really doing anything with that matchup. So now Tyrese has Precious Achiuwa guarding him. This ends up being Pascal's not really fighting for inside position there against that switch, but it ends up being a step back 3 from Miles Turner. I really don't think that's what you want in
that was a crazy shot
of fourth quarter. And then here it is again, where like Dante's being very aggressive to shade Tyrese to his left hand. He's completely sitting on his right hip. They're not even getting into the screening action. Then you're driving into Precious Achiuwa. They deflect that pass. It's like what you said, like everything that the Knicks do in contrast to the Pacers is they are committing hard to whatever they are doing. And a lot of times the Pacers aren't committing super hard to what they're doing. But at the start of the fourth quarter, Obi went like 4 or 5 minutes where he was being guarded by Jalen Brunson. So when people are seeing like, oh, TJ is getting into the paint and stuff with TJ and Obi's working, yeah, it was. And it's a credit to both of them. But Obi's screening for TJ with Jalen Brunson guarding him. And then that flips the matchups because Precious is out there at the 5. Precious is guarding Isaiah Jackson. He's not guarding Pascal Siakam. So when you flip it back up to Isaiah, Isaiah's not going to be guarded really tightly on a handoff by Precious. He's going to play off of him. And that works to the bench's advantage and why they're flowing into actions better. And then this is that same play that they would have run with Tyrese. Dante not shading TJ aggressively hard to his left. He's just playing him straight up. That gives Pascal more room to get into that action. Exact same alignment, but like you said, it is more reliant on the mid-range. But these matchups are very different. So like when you're evaluating who's going to be out there at the end of the game, like stuff was going better for the bench for specific matchup and defensive purpose reasons that weren't necessarily possible. But to your point, maybe if TJ's out there and you're conceding like we're going to play TJ because he's getting 2 feet in the paint, we value that because of some of what's going on with Tyrese. Maybe you're running that exact same action. Then again, Dante isn't going to be shading TJ aggressively to his left. You're using Tyrese as an off-ball spacer. maybe that helps Pascal get into space better. And that's what you're willing to live with. But the matchups were the matchups.
I think there's a couple things. I feel pretty strongly about like McConnell instead of Neesmith, at least for the game. Players can improve and you can alter coverages. You know, we've seen it happen. It happens in the playoffs all the time. But and sometimes players improving and playing better is a more important adjustment to alter coverages than it is like making a rotational decision. A big thing that can change, obviously, though, is you can make that call for TJ. I would have liked to see it down the stretch there. Although I wasn't really listening too much to Stan Van Gundy, like at his behest, but also like Pascal not being just a short mid-range shot maker, because he's not paid like that. That isn't the expectation. There needs to be more. Like, it's not good enough. And that's kind of where I'm at with that. You need better performances from some players. And while defensive matchups will continue to affect things, the Pacers bench is going to be an advantage. It just always will be against these Knicks. And they're going to have more ideal situations to attack because of how the Knicks, maybe there's a little bit less attention to detail in how they line up there. And the Knicks are perfectly willing to, allow that. The Pacers, there's like, if the Knicks rebound as much as they do, if the Knicks have as much like superstar type shot making in the short mid range as they do, if they're getting the pull up three from Jalen, if they're getting like these burner triples from DiVincenzo and then back cutting when people try and like shoot the gap, or sorry, not shoot the gap, like jump up to take it away, and he's like dunking, that's good basketball. And even things that are unsustainable, like as you said, allowing OG the pump and go, I don't even think is that bad. OG shoots like 43% on driving layups over the course of his career.
I think the closeouts were really bad.
Well, the closeouts are bad as far as, but like making OG put the ball on the floor, I don't think is necessarily that bad a thing, because OG is not like a very accomplished driver. He gets himself into trouble all the time. He overextends himself all the time. However, this was a game where OG was like, had a bunch of creative finishes, used different footwork, went soft off the glass multiple times. The Knicks are getting really good performances. That's like, Josh Hart is banging triples. Josh Hart is like giving you like Jason Tatum impact. It's awesome. They're getting outplayed.
To a certain extent, I just think it's really telling that we've now spent like 15 minutes talking about the reality and the internet as a whole last night over the game of whether TJ and Obi should have been in a closing lineup. And to a certain extent, it's like if you're dependent on a backup point guard, and this isn't me trying to disparage TJ, he's played really well in these two games. If you're dependent on a backup point guard to come out there and run your offense, because it isn't going to be feasible for him not to run it. That's spacing wise, that isn't going to work. Yep. What does that say? And also, like, if it would have been TJ and Obi and you're leaning more into that screening combination, maybe Brunson was guarding Neesmith, Brunson likely would have been guarding Obi in that lineup. And you're leaning into TJ with Obi screens, and Tyrese and Miles and Pascal are kind of marginalized at that point. That just kind of says a lot about what the current predicament you're in is to me. Like, if that's even a discussion, it shouldn't need to be a discussion.
Well, that's the thing too, is like, when it's the saying that you used however long ago, pigs get fed, hogs get slaughtered, right? When the defensive coverages change, when you become a primary down the stretch, are you in the exact same position? It's just now that the politics are screwed up. Now, like, the hierarchy is like in a really tough position. Now the locker room is in a tough position. These are human beings. It's a real thing. If you pull that lever and it doesn't work, and maybe it doesn't, that's tough. Then you're getting into stuff, But them's the breaks.
Some of the struggles from the starters in the third quarter. Tyrese getting switches against Isaiah Hartenstein again. Can't really shake him in space. And that ends up being a three to Pascal up above the break. Late in the season, what I really liked that the Pacers were doing in those situations is that Tyrese would get off the ball and then stand at the 3-point line, Pascal would get it and he would drive directly at Isaiah Hartenstein. It's typically the inclination of bigs to help on drives. Then when that big would help, he would throw it to Tyrese, and then Tyrese is getting to attack the switch through a closeout versus head on. When he comes in and it's a pitch and it's not really like a hard driving angle pitch, and OG can still recover out there to Pascal, I don't really think that that's the shot attempt that you want, especially given the stats that you already shared on what Pascal is shooting from three in the playoffs. And then Tyrese gets this cross match in transition against Hartenstein, gets off the ball, gets it back. And I just want to point this one out and be like, when Tyrese is getting these switches, even if this isn't a great ghost screen, look at the difference that it makes for him to be able to get in the paint because somebody went and set it. Like, could he have taken the floater there? Maybe. I would point out that OG's all the way off of TJ McConnell in the corner when he's not playing on ball, which is kind of the point with the late game offense stuff. And then it gets rotated around until Aaron drives into a crowd, which kind of seemed to be a common theme during this third quarter meltdown for various players. And then this one too, like, this is just a lot of not recognizing where advantages are. Like, Pascal right now has Jalen Brunson on him. Then that provides an opportunity to scram that out. He's not really looking to even attack, again, to your point about some of the free throw stuff. In the first two games against the Milwaukee Bucks, we would have seen him trying to get Brook Lopez to chop his feet in this situation, try to do something against that cross match. He's not even looking at the rim. Now, Miles has a switch against Jalen Brunson, which the Knicks easily scram out. But again, Miles has a huge advantage over Josh Hart as well. Can you not play through him in the post in those types of situations? Like, it just really seemed like they were just fumbling through what was going on offensively without really recognizing where advantage matchups were going to be.
Also, it's just like not taking advantage of an advantage that's like Pascal. They found the advantage. He didn't use his dribble. Use your dribble. I've seen a lot of Pascal in my career of covering basketball. I've seen a lot of Jakob Poeltl now. Some bigs really know how to use the dribble on the roll and get to cozy, tight finishes. And Pascal, like, that's a complete fumble. And we saw Miles struggle with that early against the Bucks in that series. And in fact, against the Bucks too, we saw a lot of Pascal like driving the switch to open up that move for Tyrese. And like maybe some of Pascal's hesitancy makes Tyrese want to dive closer to the baseline on that play. I don't know, but they're not mining possessions for all they're worth here. And this is all without discussing too much of the defensive end too, where they allowed like a ton of baskets.
And that's where the story begins and ends to me. You gave up 130 points to a depleted Knicks team, which is where I wanted to go to the fourth quarter and talk about two specific things. Number one, trapping Jalen Brunson, and also number two, after we're looking at those clips, what they're doing against Josh Hart when Josh Hart's one pass away. So these are all the possessions in the fourth quarter when they trapped Jalen Brunson. First of all, what do you think of them trapping Jalen Brunson at half court before I even roll the film?
I don't really ever like trapping at half court. I think it's a bad idea. I think it was a bad idea here.
It's forcing them to cover way too much ground, in my opinion. So again, like, I don't even really know why you need to high tag Isaiah Hartenstein or really come up there that high at all when he's catching the ball in space at the 3-point line. He's not going to shoot it. But Aaron's kind of up there as the low man, and that needs to be an X out. Tyrese has to be able to X out to the corner there, and then Nesmith needs to be able to take Josh Hart. This becomes way too long of a closeout, and now he's banging in a triple. Just a lot of ground to cover when you're trapping that high. Again, Tyrese and Nembhard have trapped really high. Josh Hart's putting the ball downhill out of that. They actually guarded okay out of the trap. Then they're going to get Brunson on the comeback here, and then he's going to start to – and then that's the missed box out.
You see him. He tries to find it twice, and he still doesn't get it. Like, watch him – or, well, if you can go back, like, you can see him identify in the corner. He's like, okay, that's my – and then he was like, am I chopping down on Hartenstein or am I going out to DiVincenzo? And he makes the decision to, like, chop down and double up on Hartenstein, and it just opens up that miss. And it's like, well, if – and this is like Dennis Rodman rebounder stuff, but if Brunson is shooting from that angle – where might that rebound go? Where's like the momentum most likely going to take it? Like there has to be some sort of consideration. Maybe I'm picking on it too much, but it's just like small decisions create big outcomes sometimes. Yeah.
But also, I mean, the Pacers have not been a good rebounding team all year. Like, this isn't necessarily new information. And when you're half court trapping, you're putting more pressure on a rebounding team that already wasn't very good. So here again, passing out of it, really bad closeout from Aaron Nesmith, has to engage Pascal Siakam. Now Tyrese is kind of pick your poison. Are you going to get in front of the dive from Hartenstein or the dive from Precious Achiuwa from the corner? that ends up being a foul. On every single one of these, the Knicks either got an offensive rebound, scored, or went to the free throw line. There was none that ended directly in a stop whenever I went through and caught all these this morning. So again, Josh Hart downhill out of the trap. And then
that
that's
was a good trap, actually, too. It's just Nesmith. Like,
it's Nesmith, but you can't allow your inside shoulder to get caught by that pin in. He doesn't even need to be that deep. He's not the low man. Miles Turner is. So why is he sunk into the paint here?
That confused me too. And it's like, I understand pin-ins are very, very popular now. And so people might be like, oh, that's a sneaky pin-in. If you're guarding Dante DiVincenzo, you have to be like hyper aware that, and especially if Hartenstein is anywhere near you, like it's going to come. Like you have to put yourself in winning positions. You have to do the work before the action. And I'm just like, damn, on that play, that's bad defense.
And then it's like they're trapping at half court, but then when Brunson gets the ball into these areas, it's like there's a no man's land between, are you stunting off of Josh Hart or are you not? Because to me, this is where you commit. This is where you go. When Brunson is this deep, put your extra body, make him feel contact, and then rotate into shift position up to Josh Hart. Instead, it's just
toothless
or one-on-one. Like that's not doing anything in either direction. And that's kind of where I landed overall on Josh Hart being one pass away. Because before we even look at that, like that's the difference in a lot of respects. And we've talked about this through both series. That like, even if you are going to play TJ off ball next to Tyrese, there's more that TJ can be doing to test those stunts or those next rotations than what we're currently seeing. And the Knicks are doing it. Josh Hart has made threes. He's knocking down shots, but he's also actively testing the stunts that when the Pacers are going against Jalen Brunson in ways that the Pacers just flat out are not.
This is my contention with Pascal's play in the series is like, as you said, dribbling the ball up the court, negative dribbles, going backwards. If you want to get paid the max, if you want to be a player of this caliber, if you want to harken back to like what made you a special player, and like that Euro on OG was really nice, finding the open space. He's had some nice finishes in this series. He's been like creative getting to shots, but you have to put pressure. Otherwise, the defensive shell is always that. And it's so comfortable to defend in a shell. There's like, I'm sure you could pull up. I know Benji and them, they watch the game, they stream it live, but like, I bet when they double Pascal, he loses his mind. Because like you're breaking the shell for something that maybe isn't that dangerous. Because breaking the shell is really bad. Pascal never testing that shell. Guys not testing the shell as much. You gotta. Even if it feels a little uncomfortable, you have to like extend outside yourself sometimes. That's what makes Jalen, like Brunson, so incredible. Is that for some players, Pascal hanging out in the vicinity and stabbing at the pickup would bother him. But it's like he's just so comfortable with that situation that it's toothless help defense. It doesn't, all it does is like marginally move him away from Josh Hart, and it doesn't open up anything. You have to be comfortable getting into spaces where it's tight. You have to be comfortable getting into spaces where you're going to be competing for airspace with players and playmaking or scoring out of that. And it seems like Pascal, it seems like, wants some of that frictionless scoring. And that's a problem. And guys on the Pacers as a whole wanting some of that frictionless scoring is a problem. And the Knicks, they bang threes. They shoot them over contests. They shoot the open ones. But they also don't really care if they're getting contact. They're like, give it to me. Let's go to the line. Let's get into the meat of it. And that's a huge difference in the series. Not to mention, like, well, the Knicks are just playing better. So I know the Pacers, they sent off the 78 missed calls and all that kind of stuff. And I know Rick had comments after the game, but the Pacers got to play better. The Pacers got to play a damn good series. These Knicks are for real. They play an awesome brand of basketball. Do they get a nice whistle? I think so. But are they a nice team who deserves a nice whistle? Sometimes that's basketball, you know?
I guess what was your thoughts on that, especially as somebody who covered Darko after the Raptors-Lakers game, having similar contentions about teams going into certain markets and not getting certain calls potentially?
So the Raptors-Lakers game, I believe, was historic in like the lopsidedness. There was like, I was like, it kind of broke my brain watching it. It broke my brain watching the end of game one. Like the end of game one was just, It ended up going New York's way, of course, but and we know that was really tough, especially like the Neesmith swing, that it seems a little bit sometimes like the same way that Brunson somehow got a call on Turner in game 2 when Turner was just like around and he just like pushed off of him and fell to the ground. When Halliburton got the hand on the dribble at the end of game 1, Brunson went to the ground. When Brunson goes to the ground, they call a foul. When anything happens to Brunson, like it seems like they're ready to blow the whistle. That's where you're trying to premeditate calls in refereeing. That's where you get yourself into some trouble. And every ref does it, and they do it with like quite a few different players. The end of game 1 was like a horror show refereeing wise, and it leaned all the way to New York. Game 2, the reffing in game 2, I don't think was a factor. From the outside perspective, in game 1, it was a serious factor. I wrote about it. We talked about it. But game 2, I don't know. I wouldn't go that far, I don't think.
I would say I don't have a problem if they want to submit a report to the league. I'm sure lots of teams submit reports to leagues after they see missed calls. And if they want to scrutinize that and be a ref analyst, like I understand that. And I understand Rick wanting to go to bat for his guys and his guys hearing that. And potentially that's a motivating factor when they go back home. I hope that they're spending that much time reviewing their own defensive game film and what needs to be fixed. Because even in game 1, it's like I said, like I'm not denying that there's missed calls. There were. But I'm sure there was missed calls before the final last 2 minutes. And I also know that they gave up 94-foot drives to Josh Hart, that they gambled on drives. They gave up a missed rebound on a missed free throw. Like there's other mistakes going on here. We just looked at those trapping possessions where the rotations and the help rotations are quite poor. Like I'm not debating it. I'm not going to go and sit here. The two of us aren't going to watch every single whistle that went on in the last 2 games. I apologize if people wanted us to do that. That's not something I'm going to do. I acknowledge that I have seen that there are missed calls. I've seen them in both games. I don't have a problem if the Pacers want to submit the report that they submit, but also there's more that they could be controlling that they're not controlling that needs to be better. They did get outplayed. I do think that the Knicks played with more commitment on both ends of the floor. And just to show these particular possessions, like just to provide a static compare and contrast here, this is the one that I mentioned earlier where Tyrese wheels around to get that off the gut Chicago action. TJ's standing there at the nail. Josh Hart's going to next it. Dante DiVincenzo is going to peel to TJ. This ends up being a somewhat forced pull-up from Tyrese over that rotation. Now, anytime that Josh Hart is one pass away from Jalen Brunson and the Pacers are doing somewhat similarly, Nembhard's pulled very far over there, Josh Hart's immediately going to put the ball downhill. I don't know why Pascal's hopping off of OG on an OB in that particular situation. That's another thing where like they didn't close off the role players well enough, despite the fact that they really just don't have a good answer against Jalen Brunson in general. But you can't be, this is the no man's land situation. What is Tyrese going to actually stun at the ball, or is he just opening a door when Josh Hart is there? Like it has to make a choice. Which thing are you taking away?
And also that affects the on-ball defender a lot too. Like I know that you have principles and things you want to stick to, but if you're somebody guarding on ball and you see a guy, one of your teammates starts hanging out in the vicinity, and like if there's not good communication, you're also like, okay, do I play you to this? Am I still containing the same way because you're there? Can I suddenly play a guy left because you're going to step in? What's the move? And it creates like, in an odd way, it creates these difficult defensive positions, even if you're hanging out. Because some people think like, oh, being in the vicinity creates the discomfort. It's like, no, being in the vicinity with intention and with like actually committing to why are you there is what creates discomfort. You can see this with a lot of like Jokic, for example. People talk about how ineffectual and like feckless his defense has been at the rim against the Wolves and against the Lakers. Like he's in the paint. He's just not contesting shots with much fervor. That means something. If you're going to be in the vicinity of Brunson, do it with meaning, do it with intention, do it with fervor. Like make the play, be a playmaker. Don't just be like around. Like I'm around. It's bad basketball.
Another one where they give up the switch. TJ's kind of in the gap. Josh Hart actually pulls the string and shoots it, makes that shot. these are the ones that I just don't fully understand. Like, either this is a hard commit or it's not, but like that's the exact opposite of what TJ did in the initial possession, where Josh Hart's already doing the go and catch to be able to get downhill. TJ's then caught behind him and he's getting right to the rim.
That was such a great layup. That Euro to keep it same side and take the bump and finish left, this is really impressive from Josh, like on that finish.
Overall, do you think that there's any low-hanging fruit or stones that haven't been turned in terms of what they could be doing against Jalen Brunson in some of these situations? Like, matchup-wise, would you flip the matchup? Would you try some other different type of coverage? What levers do they have to pull when they go back to Indy?
Nembhard has done a decent job of contain. Like, this is the tough part. We watched some clips of it earlier. You see Nembhard contains into like the 7 or 8 second shot clock territory, and Brunson is making like a staggering amount of like the 14 to 19 footers. Super, super impressive. And some of these doubles are done without intention. This is something that, you know, coaches talk about a lot of the time, is like, it's more important to play a scheme well than to be able to play like a bunch of different schemes with like, okay, committing to what you want and being like, and knowing your intentions and everything like that. I think that the Pacers just have to play this better. Now that might sound like kind of dumb. Like I wish I could be like, have the whiteboard and be like, this is the schematic fix. But sometimes the fixes aren't necessarily just schematic. It's also like, you have to play better within that scheme. And I think that the Pacers are in an okay position to contain. They're in an okay position to help. It's just that when you're in help, you have to be more, you have to have more attention to detail, like TJ there, or like Pascal in the corner, or like Pascal missing the box out. Or if you're going to double, you can't just be like Pascal stepping away from Hart and just like kind of being in the area and stabbing at a hand randomly. That's just as likely to send them to the line as it is to be like one of those strip blocks. You have to perform with intention all the time against the best teams in the league. They're not going to, and like the Knicks, they play very disciplined basketball. They're not going to give it to you. That's kind of where I'm at.
I tweeted it last night. I think the Pacers are in a bad spot because they don't really have a lot of other options as the primary. I think it still mainly needs to be Nembhard among the starters. They don't have a lengthy defender. That's going to have to be a priority this summer. Somebody else that you can throw on those types of matchups, and also, or it has to be attacking the rebounding issue, because it's everything that we said in the preview. It's the blitzing versus the offensive rebounding conundrum, and which one's going to be worse for you. They ended up going to the trapping, and they didn't get a stop on any of those possessions where they half court trapped. I don't really want to see any more of the half court trapping. I think that that's making them cover way too much ground. The rotations out of it were not good. If there were any adjustments that I would make, it would be play deeper off of Isaiah Hartenstein than what you're playing. Keep Miles in the drop. Keep him around the rim so that you're not giving up so many of the, what you had mentioned before, like, well, we're overplaying Dante DiVincenzo really hard, and now we're getting back cut because we're afraid of what he gives up as a three-point threat. And also our big has their heels clear outside the three-point line, and there's nobody back there to protect. Those types of things. Then committing on the stunts. Which are you doing? You're just in a no man's land. There's no full-on intention there. Are you actually going to step over and stop the ball and protect the basket first with rim deterrence? Or are you just, are we going back to the Giannis scheme from early in the season for the Pacers, the guard your yard scheme, where we're just going to be like, hey, Jalen Brunson's just going to get his, but if we stay home and keep everyone else from shooting threes, maybe we can live with that math. Like, it has to be one or the other, because right now they're kind of in a weird in-between where they're not doing either one. And I guess one other adjustment I might throw out there is when the Knicks get beat on these perimeter drives, you know, not that Tyrese had a lot of drives in the first quarter, but when he did, they were peeling off to TJ at the wing or whoever else was standing there at the wing. If Andrew's going to get beat here, I don't really understand why they can't do a help switch. Why can't Tyrese fully commit to Jalen Brunson and then Andrew peels off to Josh Hart in those situations? Maybe at the very least, Andrew can peel into that passing lane, even if Josh Hart is going to be, you know, doing more of the go and catch to try to get downhill or more of those stampede catches. I think that the peel switching would actually help them quite a bit with what some of the stunt issues were. And I didn't see them do that at all, let alone in the fourth quarter or really the entirety of what the game was, because anytime they're having to help over, like, again, Aaron Nesmith right there, he's not doubling on the bully drive. He's just like in a weird passive next at the nail, and then Josh Hart's really easily able to drive right behind him. Like, that's not either one. Like, pick a side, I guess, is where I'm at with it.
Mm-hmm. You got to guard with intention. Can't be in the middle. You want to be doing something. We've seen a decent amount of that from the Pacers so far in these playoffs. And it goes back to that thing. Like, the Pacers scored the ball a lot better during some parts of this game. And they will have these big, like, blow it open moments. And they have in games 1 and 2. They just haven't been able to hold it down because you're going to lose some of the physicality stuff that's happening over the course of the game. Some of that is attention. Some of that is attention to detail. And also, like, that's why teams are relentless, is, the shell is there. How do we open up driving lanes? How do we make them guard in these 5-on-5 concepts instead of like 1-on-1 or like, 4.5 versus 5 on the catch up and stuff like that. This is where the Knicks being so relentless helps them, and why they're coming on so strong towards the end of the games. And the Pacers, I know play 48 minutes is a little bit of a myth, except for Josh Hart, apparently.
I mean, that's a good point, though. I mean, Josh Hart played 48 minutes. No, the only player on the Pacers who played over 35 was Pascal.
Yeah.
And that's what happened at the end of the game.
Coach Carter. Just run. What are we going to do? Run. Okay. We'll just run and be in the best shape. Incredible. The Knicks are spellbinding. I'm spellbound by them. Yeah.
Those were the main things that I wanted to talk about from the game. I guess those were the controversial things that brought up. Again, I would just reiterate, like, I'm not necessarily saying TJ should or shouldn't have been out there, but I think that I can understand some reasons behind why they didn't do it. And that I think it's somewhat telling that if you're in a position at the end of a game where you have to rely on a backup point guard to help you win a playoff game, that kind of says everything in and of itself.
Yep.
Also, other main point is you gave up 130 points to a depleted New York Knicks team.
Yep. That's it is up to the higher level players on the Pacers to make sure that TJ McConnell is not looked at as a savior. And I'm not counting pockets, I promise. That's not my bag. But, like, you're paid and looked at in a certain way to perform a certain way. And in most series, what happens is that if you don't do that, and this isn't just the Pacers having to deal with this, the Pacers are getting really good performances from TJ, and credit to him, but it's never tenable to be like, oh, is the backup point guard going to save the series? Yeah. It just isn't. Your best players have to perform really well, and credit to Tyrese for a much better game. We've pretty tough on Pascal in this podcast, so we've given it to him here. But I think, like, those two need a combination game, and they need a few. And on the other end, we see that happen. The Knicks are getting those combination games. The Pacers just aren't. And so, yep, cream has to rise to the top, etc.
I guess I do have one main question on the TJ talking point. When you watch that game, do you think that more of the on-ball creation reps are falling on TJ in the minutes when TJ and Tyrese are out there because they trust TJ's playmaking, or because they don't want to work around TJ's non-shooting when he's off the ball? Because I think that's a critical ask when you're evaluating whether he should have been in the closing lineup, and also what they're doing moving forward for the rest of the series, which is the answer.
So I think it could be a mix of both. And I think, as we talked about, like, conditioning, having Tyrese on the floor and knowing that you're going to get, like, the 8-0 runs or 11-0 runs where his hand is, like, he has a firm grip on, like, this open floor concept play where it's push, it's no look, push pass, it's early hit aheads, like that kind of stuff. And knowing that there's going to be, for a guy who has back spasms, maybe some parts of the game where he's feeling a little bit better. If it's late and Tyrese is maybe, like, having a bit of trouble, maybe it is egoless basketball, right? Like maybe TJ is in there and you say it happens with Anthony Davis, for example, right? Like, and I know that's more of a guard big initiation thing, and this is something that the Nuggets really had to figure out too, is like, well, what does it look like when our best initiator initiates sometimes and we have to look elsewhere at other times? Pascal is supposed to be that, but he had a horrible game, and the free throw thing and aggressiveness has been really tough for the Pacers to navigate. Is there spots in the game where even if it's late, TJ can be looked at as the guy like 2 feet in the paint? We trust you to make decisions. We trust you to score the ball and get to dangerous spots. Tyrese will always affect the geometry of the floor with his shooting and his gravity, and we trust Tyrese to make decisions playing off of you. That's not a bad situation. And again, TJ isn't supposed to save the season, but that's not a bad situation in my mind. That's an acceptable situation to be in.
And I think that's why it's important to delineate those things, because by my eye, like I said, I didn't think that Tyrese necessarily looked like he was moving better in this game. I thought they were more intentional with him getting off the ball and where he got some of those spots. And it kind of goes back to the prior series with Damian Lillard, right? Where a lot of the focus on Dame was, why is he being so effective in the first half and not in the second half, until they got to the point in that overtime game where he was literally just standing out there as a decoy when he had tweaked his Achilles. But that was what was happening a lot in a lot of those games for Dame while he was dealing with those injuries. I don't know completely what's going on with Tyrese. I can't speak to it because I'm not in his body. I noticed things that I think look differently that he wouldn't have been doing in these same situations several months ago. So maybe that impacts him when he comes up out of halftime. Maybe that was some of the product last night. And in that regard, like if that is what's going on, maybe you do put yourself in more of an advantage situation if TJ is out there. But then a lot of the argument for TJ being played was about the defensive end, and then it goes and circles back to, you had Nembhard and Nesmith out there who are, supposedly two of the best defenders on the team. And then you're calling for TJ to be a savior for the two of them as well. And I don't necessarily think by my eye that there was like this massive difference where if it was for defensive purposes that you could be like, TJ would have shifted that on the defensive end. But
basketball is rarely so simple.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's where they find themselves headed into game 3. I'm honest enough to say to people that after I watched this and then I rewatched it and then I looked back at some of these clips, I can't speak and say like, oh, this is a clear adjustment or a clear lineup change that I would make that would change what the fortunes are here right now and what these two games were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're in a tough spot. The Knicks were the favorite coming into this series. Everybody knew that. And the Pacers maybe could have been given like injury problems or whatever, but the Pacers didn't play well enough in the first round. And the Pacers haven't played up to their standard. And if you want to beat a team that's better than you, you need to play above your standard. So that's kind of where we're at. And the Knicks keep doing it. One team plays better than the other team. There are schematic reasons for it. There's skill set reasons for it. But some of it is like, God dang dagum effort. And that's basketball sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I can just close it out and say what my tweet was. The Knicks scored 130 points. That's the story. Full stop.
That's the one.
That's the way that I see it. So hopefully better things to talk about after game 3 when this series shifts back to Indy. Who knows what will be the results of skewering over 79 missed calls. Or however many there were. Yeah. So we'll be able to talk to you again after that one.